many services male identified survivorship?
I think that's a great opening question. So much of the early history of domestic violence work has been framed around the law and the legality of actions. What this has tended to mean is that a lot of what we know as a society about intimate partner violence is really the physical abuse. There are a million Lifetime movies about the act of physically striking a partner, but how many are there where the abuse is entirely emotional or psychological? Now, it's important to acknowledge there's a pendulum shift here. It wasn't until 1993 that the last law was removed. For those listeners who are unfamiliar, it literally was state law that a husband could force their wife sexually, and that was actually considered appropriate. So the idea that you shouldn't legally be allowed to hurt the person that you're in love with is actually newer in parts of our country than even the internet. So for the first several decades of the domestic violence movement, it was entirely focused on removing these legal protections for physical abuse, which does tend to target women at a higher statistical level. This legal approach, it's a lot easier for the government because it avoids a lot of the gray areas, but it's part of what's leaving so many men vulnerable, as so much of the abuse they experience is actually protected under the First Amendment. While we might not like it, a female-identified abuser has the freedom to potentially tear a man down to his very core with intimate and personal information, or they have the ability to share intimate details or photographs publicly in a way that, even if it is illegal now in some states to do, the court of public opinion has completely decimated that man's life without even giving him an opportunity to be heard.
It's awful. It's terrible. It's awful, Dorsal. What are some of the challenges that arise when talking about male survivorship?
I would say, the first and the biggest is that no one is supposed to talk about it. I'm not even supposed to be here talking about my own survivorship story in a way. A man is a tough and a solitary creature. At least that's what we're told. We don't suffer as men, or when we do it in silence because that's the manly way to do it. But this means that for many, the issue just doesn't exist. You talk to the police department, and they'll tell you that it doesn't happen. You talk to church leaders, and it doesn't happen. Talk to family and friends, as it doesn't happen. Most men who suffer abuse will never tell anyone, and when they do, it's going to be entirely downplayed. I've literally seen groups of men joking away what are serious red flags, talking about this crazy hot scale where a man is literally being taught and reinforced that the idea that the physical attractiveness of their partner is way more important than whether or not that is a healthy, nourishing relationship. So I think this is part of the reason why we see so many male survivors experiencing abuse, especially early in their lives, prior to being 25 and younger. Because, we're taught so early that maleness is defined by the quality of your intimate partner and your ability to protect them. No one ever talks about protecting yourself or your other family members from your intimate partner. When we talk about protecting your family, it's always that outside danger, that wolf in the darkness, or that evil predator. And so at worst, if you're the victim of abuse, you have failed as a man. And at best, it simply means you're more of a man because you're handling that crazy woman, that crazy situation, and you're putting up with it and you're dealing with it in silence the way that a man does. And if you're brave enough to say enough is enough and leave, most likely the state's going to side with your female abuser when it comes to accessing custody of your children. A father might be able to save himself from abuse, but he's not going to be able to take his children with him. And what good man or good father would ever choose to save himself while leaving his children in harm's way? Everywhere you turn, society is using these harmful male stereotypes to keep us locked into place, unable to change or make things better for ourselves. Ultimately, the value of a man is defined in his expendability to his family, his friends, or his society. And we can't fix male issues without taking men off of the chopping block that literally is keeping our civilization running.
I know that's really well said, Dorsal. To me, it's the greatest social injustice almost of my lifetime. What we're doing to men, particularly men who are targets of abuse. But in your own journey as a survivor, you experienced the ways that toxic masculinity harms even male survivors. Define toxic masculinity, and then can you speak more to how that toxic masculinity harms male survivors?
Yeah, toxic masculinity, especially in the last couple of years, has become such a polarized topic, and it's become one of those things that we all say, but rarely do we actually even know what we mean by it. And so for me, when I say toxic masculinity, it's those ideas that reinforce the idea that at the end of the day, the most that a man can offer to society is their sacrifice by giving up safety, security, health, to promote or make other people better. A weird but interesting example is, for centuries, even to modern times, in instances of danger, it's often said women and children first. And that's not to say that women and children aren't valuable or vulnerable and needing to be protected. But a father of a 2-year-old child who is waiting back on shore has as much love and capacity to give as anyone else on that boat. And that idea that just because you're a man, that means your life is something that should just be willingly thrown away is so toxic, and it's why we see so many male issues, from the isolation, literally most males having 3 to 4 friends throughout their adult life. It's this constant idea that we're just disposable, that the way we're defined is what we're willing to give up and sacrifice instead of what we're willing to provide. And my own story, I woke up one evening from my abuser, who was a woman. We were married, attempting to actually stab me in my sleep. I tried to do what is the quote-unquote the right thing, the correct thing, the thing that as a domestic violence advocate I have worked to help so many other survivors do. I notified my chain of command in the U.S. Army, because that's part of the process when you're in the Army, and I applied for a protection order in the state of North Carolina. The male judge took one look at me in court and denied the protection order, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "You don't need protection. You're bigger than your wife, and you could just hurt her before she hurts you." It's that this idea, this concept that a man is a powerful and emotionless fighter. In some part of his mind, he was complimenting me, man to man. You're big, you're tough, you're strong, you're fierce. Just beat her. But one, he was denying the truth of the situation, which is I had an emotion of love for my partner that was confused and disjointed and disoriented because of the violence. But by no means did that remove the feeling of love or the need to care for them that I was still wrestling with. But it also left me incredibly vulnerable. The judge was literally, because I was a man, telling me to escalate the situation, which at best would have meant that I hurt somebody that I still cared for, or at worst, and in reality, the most likely situation, I would have defended myself, and then the police would have responded and seen this large, aggressive male with military training standing over a harmed woman, and I would have gone to jail. And that judge's advice to hurt her before she hurts me would not have come up. And so I do want to quickly point out that this is also a good place to touch on one of the most common misconceptions of domestic violence, because I imagine, some of your listeners are thinking in their head or wanting to say, to that younger Dorsal, well, why didn't you just leave? Like, you need a protection order, you didn't need to hurt her, just leave the house. Well, it's important to recognize that leaving is oftentimes not the safest thing that a survivor can do. With a U.S. active duty role, I couldn't leave the city or the state of North Carolina. I was legally required to stay there. And so that would have meant my abuser was in the same town as me, knowing my schedule without me knowing theirs because I was no longer in the same house. And so it's important to understand that if a survivor is telling you that they're in danger but they're not leaving the home, there might be a safety reason that's keeping them there at the moment. And so I just want to highlight that, but just really reinforce this idea that, a man, quote unquote, doing the right thing and seeking legal protection, and the response was do more violence. And that's not the solution.
No. I am so sorry,
This is Tara, and I have a few questions that I want to ask you. I want to go back to the question that you just answered previously when you said about taking men off the chopping block. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I really want people to understand that there is a attack against men, and men are often on the chopping block. So can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you often see, and not just with domestic violence, but with all male issues, that there's this constant downplay or this constant thought that, males, especially men or males over the age of 18, they just don't have the same need or the same desire for support. I'd say one of the areas that I feel most comfortable talking about this in is in homeless services. Single adult men tend to make up the highest percentage of the homeless out on the street. On average, the person that is most likely to become vulnerable to homelessness and to stay homeless is a single adult male. But constantly what you're seeing is protests and blockages of any form of service or support for single adult men, because there's this constant belief that they are dangerous, that there's something inherently about them that either led to their deserving of being homeless, or they are now so unsafe that you cannot provide services. And so you'll often see family homeless service providers pitted against single male adult providers, because neighborhoods want shelters that serve cute, adorable little kiddos, but they don't want services for men, because men can be dangerous, men can be violent, men can be aggressive. But how often is that the only thing we're allowed to be? In my story, the immediate response to my desire for help protecting myself was get more violent, get more aggressive, get more scary. And how often is that the solution to so many of the problems that boys and men are given to face? And so we are oftentimes the first to be forgotten about when it comes to any form of human service and support, because again, it's that idea that the largest part of a man's role is to sacrifice his life for the greater good of the society, the community, or his family, never minding how much love and other ways of support that man can give other than just giving their life away.
Right. That's well said, Dorsa.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that, because we do expect men to, take care of the family, to risk their lives to save, women and children. So, no, for sure, you guys can, for sure, men are definitely, I guess, looked at as if they are, supposed to sacrifice themselves for their family. So I do understand that. And when you talked about, another thing that you just talked about was that, people are all willing to accept people into their domestic violence centers, but not men. And especially minority men. When there are single men who come in for services, yes, you can bring in people for services, but when you say men, of course, there's, okay, well, what kind of men? You get all these other questions asked. And then if it's a minority man, well, what's his criminal past? What's his background? But when they were women, I don't feel like they ask the same questions. Can you agree with me on that, or can you expand on it a little bit more?
Yeah, I would have to say that for a large part, I definitely agree. When I started, working in the domestic violence field, there were a lot of confidential domestic violence shelters that actually had cutoff ages just for the male children. And so there were programs where as soon as your child hit puberty, 13 or 14, that meant they, and this is literally the instructions that they would provide in the training, they looked like a man. And because they now look like a man, it is triggering or unsafe or unwelcome. And the reality of the situation, and this has really been highlighted for the situations with the police across the country, but, minority children, especially, I'll just be very upfront, black boys in particular tend to have really, great athletic, bents and procedures. And so I've literally served, a 12-year-old boy that had broader shoulders than I did at 12. And, he's an amazing boy, but anytime he went anywhere, everyone was convinced that he was a man. But that is still a 12-year-old, both in mindset and personality and in learning. But they look so much like a male. There has been some shift in providing those services, but I will say it is complicated. When I was managing the confidential DV shelter, I remember we provided support for a woman who had been severely abused by a male. And so seeing me in the shelter was triggering for her. Like, it legitimately, it's not a made-up excuse. There are some women who have been so traumatized that seeing another male, especially in the first few weeks or days after the abuse, can be triggering. But there are ways to accommodate that. And very rarely have I actually heard from the survivors that they don't want the children of other survivors to be present. Now, at least here in the Pacific Northwest, I don't know of any more programs that kick male children out. But whether they will serve adult males on site is definitely still very much up in the air and in question.
Good. What are some of the current options available for men trying to escape domestic violence?
So there is some good news, thankfully, here. We are starting to see a little bit of a change. Like I just mentioned, here in the Pacific Northwest, now at the very least, if you're a survivor fleeing with a 15-year-old boy, that boy can come with you into some of the programs. And with more men coming forward and creating more of awareness, it's helping to create more services for men. A couple at the national level that I would definitely call out the National Domestic Violence Hotline or the National Sexual Assault Hotline. They serve people from all genders, and they've been working to increase the number of male social workers that are available and volunteers who are responding to those calls. So it's even potentially an option now when you call to ask, is there a male advocate I could speak to, or is there a time later that I can potentially call? I'd say if you're located in my part of the world here in King County, Washington, Dawn has an amazing crisis line and programs that they provide services and support for all genders. It's an amazing opportunity to get help with these resources, but there are not very many that are specific to just men. And to truly end domestic violence, what we're going to need is more male partners who are willing to take on the role of social worker and advocate. There's a desire and a willingness to staff a crisis line with more male social workers to respond to that need. But there aren't very many men in the social work field currently. And so that is a huge gap that we're trying to overcome, especially if, we're trying to make a greater effort to aim services towards men and boys. I want to be, clear that there are some men out there that are doing the work, but we desperately need to see that number increase it's the only way to reduce domestic violence, and this is true for all genders, is to have all sides working together on this issue. There are men who are suffering every single day. It's in the intro to this very show. Every single day there are hundreds of men that are suffering. The only way that we will end gender-based violence in our country is to have all genders at the table working to end it.
Thank you so much, Dorsal. We have about 3 minutes left before we go to break. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully we can have you back again. You're just a wealth of knowledge and experience, and you have so much to offer. Thank you so much. In our last 2 minutes, how does someone advocate for greater awareness on the topic of male survivorship?
Thank you for letting me be here, and I think it's a great way to close. I hear a lot from people that it's really hard to tell somebody is being abused, especially when it's emotional or psychological abuse, and they're not wrong. If I were to come into work tomorrow with a black eye, someone's going to ask me, what's going on at home. But if I show up to work, not having slept the night before because I wasn't safe to sleep, people are just going to joke about me being tired and ask me to get a cup of coffee. So I think, something to keep in mind as you're working with and talking with the men in your life is to understand whose world is getting smaller.
Yes.
Your best friend might be all about his new girlfriend, but if his world starts to shrink, that should be a flag for you to start wondering what's going on. Is she cutting him off from, other friends and family? Is she the type of girlfriend that doesn't let him have other female friends? Is she requiring access to all of his social media accounts? Each one of these questions hit one of the main signs of abuse, which is that isolation. The abuser's got to get the victim away from their support as much as possible. And again, this is one of the places where societal expectations work. We're supposed to be isolated. We're supposed to be the lone wolf ranger that doesn't have very many friends and isn't opening up about what's going on around us. I've heard men say that they're only allowed to love 2 women in their lives, their moms and their lovers. But that is just so wrong. A man has so much love to give to the world, and it's not just the love of a silent sentry in the wilderness. If you see or begin to see signs of this isolation, don't let it push you away. Don't let your friend be isolated. You need to be there for your friend, and they need to know that you're going to stick it out with them. 1 in 3 men have experienced some form of intimate partner abuse, according to the CDC. Half of those men experienced it before the age of 21. I'm one of these men, and even having this conversation today, it's been really hard. I feel like less of a man, and that is so stupid, because at the end of the day, it takes more strength to ask for help. And we create more opportunities by creating spaces like this one today, where men can come forward, share their experiences, and hopefully other men and people who love those men can do something about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dorsal. That's a wonderful way. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to go to break, and then we'll be back with Professor Michael Jack.
If you're looking for a new informative health and lifestyle show to gain knowledge and inspiration to help guide your journey to think, work, and live more powerfully, then you need to listen to Sage Advice with Melissa. Now, whether you're trying to improve your life from a mental, physical, or spiritual journey, Sage Advice with Melissa Coleman, CEO of Sage Skincare, delivers weekly advice from industry experts to provide you with insightful suggestions to allow you to thrive with a better quality of life. Melissa's mission? To guide you through the uncharted waters of health and wellness and to give you a voice to help improve your life. So be sure to tune in to Melissa on KWRH 92.9 FM every Thursday at 10 a.m. You'll be glad you did.
Hey, listeners, saying thanks to your customers is nice and polite, but expressing your gratitude in memorable and ongoing ways can boost your business. At Promo Experts LLC, we exceed our customers' expectations. For over 20 years, our product knowledge and experience has helped them with their marketing initiatives and trade show graphics. We are happy to put that experience to work for you. Quality products, great customer service, and prices are our number one priority. We work with you to find unique, creative, and new ideas that fit your image and expectations, helping you build strong relationships with your customers. When you select Promo Experts as your marketing partner, we help you to see more than the big picture. For more information about this exciting opportunity, contact Diane Carson, President, at 636-458-5241. That's 636-458-5241. Let Promo Experts help you to move your business brand beyond the bland. Have you always wanted to write your own book but don't know where to start? Publishing Concepts, a publishing company located right here in St. Louis, offers everything from consulting, book printing, copyrights, ISBNs and barcodes, print book layout, ebook and iBook layout, graphic design, cover design, ghostwriting, typing and editing, distribution, marketing, and more for an affordable price. Visit PublishingConceptsLLC.com or just Google Publishing Concepts to get started today, or call 314-781-8880. That's 314-781-8880. Publishing Concepts. We help you sell more books.
Okay, Terry, you are listening to the Men's 911 show, coming to you on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. on KWRH 92.9 FM and KXOK 102.9 FM, simulcasting, and on the My Genre Radio Network, Monday to Friday at 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Go to the usradionetwork.com. Well, welcome back, audience. You are listening to our Men's 911 show. Our next guest, Michael G. Hickey, is the oldest of 11 children and was raised in Belleville, Illinois. He recently retired Professor Emeritus after teaching English and creative writing for 30 years at South Seattle College. He was the executive board for the American Federation of Teachers for 4 years. Hickey has published fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, and prose in dozens of quarterlies and periodicals, including the Seattle Review, the Seattle Weekly, and the Atlantic Review. He has published 2 novels, Counterclockwise and Tell Me What You Want, and the final installment of the True Blood trilogy is tentatively scheduled for release later in 2023. Michael Hickey has also published 3 books of poetry and prose, In Defense of Eve, A Dress Walked By with a Woman Inside, and How to Talk to Girls, and Other Urban Myths. He won the Candlelight Poetry Award from Armadillo Poetry Press in 1998 and was, in 2008, he was elected Seattle's 8th Poet Populist. Michael Hickey also has worked as a volunteer writing teacher in bereavement camps for kids, King County Youth Detention for teens, and the Monroe Correctional Complex for adult detainees. He has also had gallery showings for his art, photography, and recently started a clothing line inspired by the painting of Jackson Pollock called Peacock Splash Couture. Michael Hickey says that his biggest thrill since retiring and publishing his first children's book, Travis the Talking Dog, for which the illustrator was in Ukraine a month after the war had already started. To his illustrator, Michael says, "Long live Ukraine."
Well, welcome back to the Men's 911 show. This is Tara, your co-host. Hey, Michael, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, and can I just say it's a real pleasure and honor to be here for such an important topic.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So we're going to get right to the question. How did you become interested in writing about trauma?
When I became Seattle's 8th Poet Populist back in 2008, I came across a group called the Pongo Teen Writing Program, which was founded by Richard Gold, who was working at Microsoft at the time. And the Pongo Teen Writing Program goes into psych hospitals, teen shelters. I worked at King County Youth Detention, and this is all on a volunteer basis. And what Richard found is that the more people wrote about their trauma, the more it was elevated from a subconscious level to a conscious level, where they were able to face it and kind of get some of these things off of their chest, so it didn't continue to percolate in their subconscious mind in a very corrosive and damaging way. So that to me was something that was transcendent, and I started to employ these tactics, these techniques in my college writing classes. And not only did it work with teens, but it worked with my my college-age students as well. And I could just tell that there was a catharsis, a therapeutic aspect to this that was very tangible and visceral, and it was exciting to watch as people grow. And so that's kind of how I came upon this when I learned about the Pongo program.
Well, that's very exciting. I am an avid journaler, so I try to journal all the time, just, my thoughts, the clip going on. So to hear that you're teaching a class on writing that is actually healing trauma is awesome.
Well, I have to say, Tara, that the idea of journaling, I think, is critically important. We used to think of it as, teenage girls keeping a diary. Well, it's much different, I think, than that these days. Journaling allows you to tap into your innermost thoughts. And the biggest thing that we encourage with Pongo is to write from the heart. Just write from the heart and, be honest. And as Richard Gold likes to say, guilt is like the surface of the earth. Guilt is saying I did. Shame is like the core of the earth. Shame is saying I am something wrong. And so once you dig into these things and you try to find out the reasons, and it's a journey of personal growth that it doesn't work for everybody, and not everybody is willing to write about the traumas that they've had in the past. But for those who do, I've seen some miraculous results that are really quite breathtaking, to be honest.
Absolutely. How many years did you actually teach this class?
So I taught for 30 years at South Seattle College, and I was tenured and faculty president for a couple of years and that kind of thing. But the difference between me, and this is not braggadocio or anything, I'm just saying that my colleagues in the English department, they had lit degrees and rhetoric and comp degrees. I had creative writing degrees. And so I came at things a little bit differently. And with the Pongo writing program, that's the same thing, as we emphasize poetry, and it's not just write about the worst thing that happened to you or the worst thing that your domestic partner did to you. It's also writing prompts like, what brings you joy? When's the last time you were truly happy? And so there's a lot of different writing prompts that we use, and typically the individual that I work with, I'll say like, oh, well, what's on your mind? Let's just write about what's on your mind. And oftentimes they'll say, I don't know. And so at that point, I usually go back to the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about your family. Or in this case, let's talk a little bit about your domestic partner. And once they break through, once they give themselves permission to write from the heart and be honest, then some really incredible things start to transpire.
Absolutely. So in your years of teaching this class, Mike, how many times did students experience a breakthrough from their trauma, like trauma that they may have experienced through their childhood, or something traumatic that just happened in their life that they have been suppressing? Like, how many times did you actually help them with this writing class receive a breakthrough?
Well, just to clarify in terms of the word help, what I did and what I think I continue to try to promote is to create a safe space so you can write from the heart, you can be honest without fear of retribution, or somebody's going to say, scold you for saying something that they find to be unsavory. So I guess I go back to this one individual in particular who was on the battlefield in Iraq, and one of his fellow Marines got his legs blown off by an IED, and this student wrote this essay about how he felt this profound shame that somehow he wasn't able to run out into the battlefield and save his comrades. And just the act of writing that essay relieved, and this is something he told me at the end of the course, relieved him of that shame and guilt that he had internalized for the years after he had gotten out of the Marines. So, yeah.
Wow.
I'll tell you another one. So, can I tell you another one real quick?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
This is female, not male, but I had a student, and I kept this one. It was called The Yellow Dress. She grew up, a young black woman. She grew up in Kenya, and when she was 9 years old, she got her very first dress for Easter, and it was a yellow dress. It was a new dress. All of her other clothes were hand-me-downs. This was her first ever real dress, and she was so proud of this thing. And on Easter later that day, somebody in the village took her out into the jungle and raped her. And so this was 10 years previous to when she was my student. And so she had written this essay in which she wrote about it. And she said at the very end of the class, I have students do like a final free writing about their experience in the class. And she said that before she wrote that, every night she went to bed thinking about how she wanted to kill herself and every boy she saw. And she said that after I wrote that essay, I realized that I was no longer thinking about suicide or killing anybody anymore. It's like it has been, this cement overcoat had been taken off my shoulders. That's her line, not mine. So I've seen up close and personal the redemptive and cathartic and therapeutic, the healing that writing has the potential to bring.
Absolutely. In these writing prompts that you have, what are some of the prompts you use to facilitate timed writing?
Right. So we have a lot of them. I'm not necessarily saying that we go in and say, write about, the most terrible thing that your girlfriend did to you or your wife did to you or things like that. I kind of like to approach it from the other side. When's the last time you truly felt joy, that you truly felt free and happy? And if you can get people to write about that, then it often leads to what happened to that. Where did that go? Where did that feeling go? Where you woke up every morning excited to be alive, and now you're waking up every morning, looking around, trying to make sure that your partner's not trying to hurt you. So, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. So I like doing list poems, and the one that I was rereading last night, the prompt was, I just thought you should know. And so basically there's a parallelism, where you're using repetition. I just thought you know that even though I still love you, I see violence in your eyes against me. I just thought you should know that every time you hit me, you wound me in a way that will not go away. I just thought you should know. And so this individual goes through this list of these things she's writing to her boyfriend, her ex, about, and this listing thing, it often starts out very slow and kind of pedestrian, but then once it gathers momentum, then you're really getting down to the core and people are addressing the deepest hurt. Writing is an act of resilience and addressing the most profound emotional pain. And that's the exciting thing when it works. It's very exciting to watch these people who are able to smile again.
Absolutely. So do you believe this writing experience should be used at for different traumas, for in safe houses, just in places where the trauma has been so extensive that they've tried everything. Maybe this writing exercise could benefit from that. Do you see where? Go ahead.
Well, I'm absolutely an advocate for that. Trauma is trauma is trauma, and to write about it, I mean, I've had some childhood trauma of my own that I've written about. I couldn't afford a therapist or a counselor at the time, so my first novel was essentially a lot about my childhood trauma. But the more one writes about these things, especially this idea of journaling and maybe, I'm not talking about writing for 3 hours a day. I'm talking maybe 15 minutes, every other day, something like that. It can bring really amazing results. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for, and I wish that the previous gentleman Dorsal was talking about encouraging people to be honest about their feelings. I had no idea, to be honest with you, that this domestic abuse against men was a thing until I started talking to you and Sharon and others in Dorsal. And now that I realize how widespread and how common it is, I see that this is a problem that is going to continue to extrapolate unless we take some demonstrative efforts to do something about it. Efforts at the legislative level, but also, the old thing of think globally but act locally. What can you do in your neighborhood to reach out to somebody who and I have to interject too. A lot of times when people write these things, I say, show it to me if you want to, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Now they always do. They always want to. I had a kid at a bereavement camp. His dad had died, and he was 9 years old. His name was Aaron. And his dad had died, and so he really missed his dad. They lived on a lake, and he went fishing with his dad every day. And so my part of it was to do a writing component. And so I was told by one of the grief counselors that, oh, yeah, this kid is not going to do anything. He hasn't done anything except walk around and put bugs and worms and stuff in his pocket so we could use them for fishing. And the other kids would scream when they saw him. And so I said, I'll get him to write. She said, no, he's not going to write. I said, okay, I'll bet you a Rice Krispie square at once that he'll write. And so we did it. I gave people a prompt, write to your parents or parents who had died, but not from today, from 20 years from now, and tell them what you're doing. Right? So bring some creativity. And then with this little boy, I walked up to him at the end and I said, and you, I would like you to write a story about a 265-pound sea bass that can talk. And he looked up at me with his little eyes, and he said, really? And I said, really. And he looked down, he held up his open palm, I put one of those little pencils in it, and he wrote furiously for 5 minutes. Everybody read theirs, every single kid read theirs, except him. And then they all went out for lunch, but he stayed behind. And I wasn't going to ask him to read it. I wanted him to ask me if I wanted it to be read. And he said, do you want to read it? And I said, yeah, if you're okay with it, I'd like to. And at that point, about halfway into this writing, he started talking about his dad and how much, getting emotional just thinking about it, and how much he missed fishing with him and how much he loved him. And his dad was everything to him, and how is he going to go on? But saying this through the mouth of a 265-pound sea bass, it was, sometimes these prompts, one can work really, really well with Sharon, and then another one might work really, really well with Tara. So there's about 50, 60 prompts that we use at Pongo, and I can almost always find something that somebody's going to connect with.
Great. So I'm trying to see what questions I didn't get to ask you.
I can
You're
ask one.
answering mostly all of them.
Yeah, I
You
can
got
ask
something?
one. I got one, Tara.
Okay.
What do you recommend if someone is not emotionally ready to share their experience?
And that happened. And I used to tell my students, this is mostly for English 101 and above. I usually typically do not do this in a developmental English class because most of those students were ESL students from other countries, and they're just trying to learn to put sentences and paragraphs together. But for the other students, I would say, look, write about a time where you learned a hard lesson in life, and if it's about some sort of trauma, sexual, psychological, violent, whatever it is, if you're not ready to go there, don't go there. I don't want you to end up on a psychiatrist's couch because of Mike's Little English 101 class. But on the other hand, if you are willing to go there, you might find breakthroughs that you had never previously imagined. And so it's very important to have that disclaimer. I don't want you to write about this if you're not ready to write about this. The thing I have found about millennials in today's generation is they're not like my generation. I'm in my mid-60s, and these are things that you just did not talk about, But today's generation of younger folks, they seem much more open to writing from the heart and to be honest about the trials and tribulations in their lifetime. And so, but yeah, you're right. There are some people who absolutely are not ready, but I have found that far.
How do you see this trauma writing helping men, knowing what you know now about male targets of domestic violence and what they're going through and the social injustice of it and how it's difficult for men to express their vulnerability and the whole narrative? How do you see trauma writing looking, if you're working with men? What would that look like, or how would you approach that?
Well, that's a great question. Because I think there is a difference between men who have been emotionally retarded for generations, in my opinion, versus women who tend to be have more ability to express themselves from a deep place. So for men, the men that I've had who've written about trauma, like the gentleman who was in the Marines who saw his buddy get blown in half, when they write these things, I think it's very important for me to say to them privately, not in class, but after class, we've got 3 really brilliant mental health counselors on campus, and they'd be happy to sit down and talk with you, and they can also give you resources for low or no cost therapy in the community if you're interested. And I've actually walked men, because once I told them about this, I wasn't sure if they'd actually follow through with it. And I've actually walked men over to the counselors on our campus. And of course, I contact the counselors in advance and say, hey, we're coming over. Here's the dude's problem. And so I'm not saying that writing is a replacement for therapy and counseling. I'm saying it's in addition, in cases, in extreme cases, it's not in place of, it's in addition to.
Good. Yeah. Do you encourage people to be honest when they're in their writing?
Yes. So I also teach fiction writing, and so, but even in fiction writing, there's an element of honesty. The big thing about the Pongo writing program is just to write from the heart. Just be honest. A lot of men who are traumatized in the ways that we've been discussing today, a lot of men are traumatized in ways that they're not going to talk about it because, again, they're ashamed of it. They think that they've done something wrong to deserve this, to earn this intense retribution against them for things that they don't completely understand. They're very confused. It's like Dorsal said earlier. On the one hand, you love this person, but on the other hand, this person is emasculating you to the point where you don't even feel like a person anymore, much less a man. So yeah, I just think it's really important to get people to feel like they can be honest. Create a safe space where they're not going to be judged. I'm not going to correct them on their grammar, their comma placement, on any of that. Just write from the heart. And I often tell them to write as fast as you can for 5 minutes without stopping. Do not stop to erase. Do not stop to think of what the next line is. Do not cross anything out. If you can't think of what to say, just write, I can't think of what to say. I can't think of what to say, over and over and over again. This is based on an essay by a guy named Peter Elbow, who wrote up a piece called Free Writing. Free writing, or as I like to call it, speed writing, allows you to get into, again, that subconscious part of the mind. And oftentimes nothing really materializes or surfaces until they get about halfway into it. And then things start to come out that they've been, hiding for sometimes years.
Right. We have, our audience, we have mental health professionals, listeners, and providers and coaches and people who work with men. If they're interested in incorporating this trauma writing into their services, how can you suggest how they can start that? I mean, what do they need to provide that?
Yes, there are, and I in preparation for today's show, I spent several hours last night online, and there are both on YouTube, but if you just Google it, there are many places out there, experts who can coach somebody on the facilitation of writing about trauma, and various prompts out there. And rather than give you some of these names and stuff, I would just encourage mental health professionals who are listening to the show to do a little research on their own, because they'll find that there are some extremely qualified, incredible sources out there who can help lead the individual. Right, here's a prompt that you can use, or maybe you could think about, again, going back to, I just thought you should know, and fill in the blank. I just thought you should know, and fill in the blank. There's a lot of trauma advice about trauma writing online, and it wouldn't take long for a good qualified mental health professional to find some things online that they can employ in their own services to trauma victims.
Okay, very good. What you know about, like you shared a little bit about your own stuff, that you didn't know that this was a real issue, that men are abused. What, as a man, to our men listeners who might be going through that, what speak to them. Like, what do you think they need to hear?
I think what it all starts with, and I do quite a bit of work in the recovery community from addiction, from chemical and behavioral addiction, and what we say to those folks is very similar to what I would say to the kind of folks that we're talking about, male trauma victims. Is, first of all, you've got to make the decision that this is not the way you want to live the rest of your life. I can't make that decision for you. You have to come to terms with, you have to get to this intersection that I can't continue this way. It's killing me. It's killing me one day at a time. Once you're able to get someone to make that decision, that conscious decision of, I need to do something to save my life, then the rest of it can kind of fall into line. But if the person refuses, if they're still trying to hide the shame and guilt that they feel, and they refuse to be open, then it's really difficult to pull it out of them. But if they are open, and increasingly I have found men to be more and more open into writing about, what they've been through, then you can have some real breakthroughs. But it all starts with the individual's willingness to participate in their own recovery.
Right, great. We have about 3 minutes left, Mike. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
My final words of wisdom, I don't know how wise they are, but I would just say this. I have found that, and this might just be my imagination because I don't have a lot of empirical data to back this up, but in my mind, we've been in this pandemic now for 3 years, and I found that the isolation that people are experiencing has increased domestic violence and domestic abuse. And so I don't think this is a problem that's decreasing. I think it's increasing, and for men especially. And oftentimes, the letters that I've been reading that are connected to the Men's 911 show, oftentimes these letters are not coming from men; they're coming from women, from mothers and sisters who are seeing, these men that they love being emasculated by this, violent and vicious partner, and this controlling of this individual that they love. Maybe the individual's not willing to come forth, but they are. And so I've read some letters about as heartbreaking as they can possibly be. But again, at the end of the day, If the man is not willing to participate in his own recovery, then it's really hard to make that breakthrough. I can go, I'm thinking about this one guy in the Monroe Correctional Complex, and this is a maximum security prison, who he had suffered a lot of trauma in his life, sexual trauma when he was very, very young. And so he had never wrote about that because he was ashamed. Well, I tried to create a safe space for these guys where they could write about it. And again, if you want me to read it, I'll read it. If you don't want me to, I'm cool with that too. Most of them want you to read it, and most of them want to expunge this toxicity from their soul.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, so much for coming on, and we'll have you on again and sharing the information. If you are experiencing domestic violence, men, you can call the Family Place at 214-941-1881 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Thank you.
Welcome to the Men's 911 Show. Each week, mental health host experts Sharon Jackson and Tara Evans share their wisdom on how to help men afflicted with female abuse. The mission is to support men who have suffered interpersonal abuse and assault of domestic